Hi guys, it's Lisa Dawn from Because Phillies Love, and for today's spotlight, I'm here with Omari Baye, who is an author, children's books author, and I'm so excited to talk to you today. So, first question I usually ask anyone I'm interviewing for Because Phillies Love is to just provide a little bit of backstory and history of why you decided to write the book Spaces.
Okay. So that's a funny story because all of it starts with COVID, which we know has like completely taken over for like the last 2 years, and recognizing that there was a real need to have a discussion just with my own children about what was happening and how they were feeling about like all of the rapid changes with having to leave school, losing their friend groups, seeing their friends move away remotely, not even being able to connect and say goodbye. So there were a lot of feelings that were kind of caught up in there, and I didn't know if they even had the language to discuss it. So I was like, well, maybe let's just start having a conversation about how your day was.
Right.
And if they would answer with good, I would say, well, what was good about it? Right? Give me a little bit more context. Let me just spend this 5 minutes kind of doing a deep dive about what it means to be good. Was it good because a friend didn't move away? You know, was it good because you were able to actually log on because we were trying to teach like all these skills, right?
Yes.
So it went from trying to get your handwriting and cursive together to now I have to teach you how to type, and the only thing you've ever really held is a tablet.
Right.
So even the concept of a mouse is like foreign.
Yes.
And in my experience as a therapist, I recognize that often like we don't have enough discussions with children about like feelings, and for adults, especially in like the education realm, we often say, oh, you just have an attitude, or they're good, or they're mad, or any of that, but we never say, well, maybe they're disappointed or frustrated. Maybe they're not hyper, they're just really driven, right? They're excited about this thing. So
I think that's so important because we have to dig deeper to those monosyllabic answers, right? So, if something is usually like a yes or a no, and we want to be able to have kids communicate a little bit better and share how they're feeling.
Right.
So for me, when I took a look at Spaces, and it's an amazing book, one question I had was, how are kids relating to expanding that answer? Like, how were you able to convey that in the book that people could understand, kids, especially parents having the conversation with kids, really drive to that next level. So it's not just no mom or yes mom.
So interestingly, like my kids were my test group, of course. So first, just down to like the characters in the book, like what should they look like, and just kind of looking around in different children's books that we do have at the house, because they have their own library and they have their personal library in their rooms. And then once they're done, I know this is a long story, but once they're done with it being like their favorite book and it moves second tier, my oldest daughter can put it on the shelf, and then her brothers can pick it up. But either way, just looking at the characters and not really seeing a lot of representation, not seeing characters that look like them, I was like, man, I really want the book to look like everybody. I want every kid to pick it up to be able to say, okay, you know what, this is me.
Yeah.
So even down to the feelings, we looked at what activities were like relatable, right? So what would it mean to be driven? Well, one, to be driven, you would have to A, want to go after something, B, persevere even when you fail, and C, you would want it to be something that a child would actually do, right? So we're not going to say like, oh yeah, I went skydiving, because 9 out of 10 at 5 years old, you're not skydiving, right? But you definitely know what it is to try to do a trick on your bike or a trick on your skateboard, and to fail and then get back up and do it again, even with children walking. So that's one way like it kind of came about. How are children relating to it right now? We're having a great reception from children, and we're hearing them use the words. I'm kind of frustrated right now, or I'm feeling a little anxious right now. I'm feeling a little nervous, right? And then we can have the discussion about like what to do with it afterwards.
Absolutely, and I think there are two things that you said there that really make sense. Just having representation in characters that is relatable, and not just relatable aesthetically, because that's important. You want to pick up a book where someone looks like you, and then you also want to pick up a book and say, how are they dealing with something, and how can I aspire to just find answers the way that the book allows you to find answers. So I think in the biggest takeaway, guys, is the representation matters. It's important to talk about your feelings. It's important for parents to be able to have that conversation. The book Spaces does that. I'm going to grab it right here this is the book, this is the author. So how can folks find your book?
So, another great question. You can find the book right here at Umoja House Cafe, Cafe and Books. This is one of the first Black-owned bookstores to carry spaces. You can also find it at S Cafe Lounge. That was the first cafe in Philadelphia on American Street, also Black-owned to carry spaces. Or you can go to thespacesbook.com, and you can also follow us on Instagram at thespacesbook.
That's a good call. So I'm going to ask him to say that again. You guys can find the book at Umoja Bookstore. They're at 6338 Germantown Avenue in Philadelphia. You can find the book at ES Cafe Lounge. They're at
1447 American Street.
American Street. And your Instagram handle, shout out?
At the Spaces Book.
Okay, and this is Omari Baye. He is the author. I want to just pivot a little bit and give a little bit of background on your history and why you decided to write the book. Like, I know you're a therapist, children's therapist, and that's so important to understand when you're writing a book where kids have to talk about feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up here in Philadelphia. I grew up all over. North Philly is my home.
Represent.
Absolutely. 21st of Diamond, 21st of Woodstock. I am. What was the second part of that question?
No, just talk a little bit. No, and this
cool.
is great. Talk a little bit about your history as a therapist and how that inspired you to write the book.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So after going to high school here, I attended Morehouse. Learned a lot. It was funny because you imagine going to an HBCU, it won't be a culture shock. But the shock to me was that, oh, you mean all of us aren't poor, right? So growing up in North Philly, you have this idea that like everyone kind of grew up in like these humble beginnings, and then going to Morehouse, I'm meeting children whose like parents were ambassadors of countries, and Holyfield's wife, and Denzel's son, and this person, that person. You're like, man. So all of us are not the same.
Right.
That was the first thing, and none of us look the same and dress the same.
Right.
You know, because my people that were from the valley definitely didn't dress like we did in our oversized clothes and our big jerseys. But after teaching, so I left Morehouse and began teaching environmental ed in Maryland. And it was funny because we were teaching in this really remote part of Maryland, Cecil County. Shout out to North Bay. And we were busing students from Baltimore City. And it was an interesting dynamic because with all of the heart and the character, you really see like how close Philly and Baltimore are, right? And interacting with those children, I was like, man, I really, really, really want to be like a therapist. I want to be a child psychologist. I just knew it. So made my way back, attended grad school, and then after working in adult psych for a while, I was like, you know, I may need to venture out a little bit more because the stuff that I'm seeing in this DSM-4, it doesn't play out like this in real life. And through the work with the school district, it led me to becoming an in-home family therapist, family-based therapist, and functional family therapist. And just like in that work and transitioning in the shelter, you find that like there's really a need to discuss like the impact of trauma on the lives of children, but also looking at just parentification and the idea that there's this weird dynamic that takes place in families that are experiencing trauma, where a lot of times children are made to be responsible for the parents' like emotional security and well-being, right? Which is really hard, right? That's a huge weight.
And you're a child.
Yes, you're a kid, right? They're being made to become older, younger, and develop emotionally in ways that, quite honestly, they're not equipped to. And at the same time, we're saying, be a child. It's like those two things are, they don't.
They contradict, yes.
Very much so. So just with Spaces, it's like it's all about children being children, but it's not just a book about emotions. It's a book about resilience. Because with every space where a child, quote unquote, like fails, you always hear them say, like, when I do my best, I'll win, and if I don't, I'll try again, right? Or, you know, I didn't do as well on this, particular test, but next time, like, I'll surely ace it.
It's actually having them think a certain way of the next step and not just get stopgap at just like, I failed, right? Because failure is growth, and I know it's what we're learning as adults. We learn that you fail up and you lean in. So
Absolutely.
yeah, this is great. I'm so excited to meet Omari. It's Black History Month. We're starting Black History Month. It's very important for us to talk to our kids. This is an amazing book, guys. It's Full Spaces. The author is Omari Baye. I'm so happy to have met him. Thank you so much for doing
you.
this.
Appreciate it.